Hi guys, and welcome to SN Battle Reports, but a slightly different video today. We've got a Codex review of the brand new Tau Empire. So, firstly, thank you very much to Games Workshop for sending this early so we could preview it, play it in games and all that. By the time you watch this, there will already be a battle report out, so if you haven't watched that, you can pause this video, you can go and watch that first, or you can watch this one just to see what the general consensus of the new book is. Now, I will obviously start by prefacing this by saying that we won't be doing a full Codex review, like a full extensive one. There'll be other channels that obviously will be doing this, so we're just going to be basically running through what I personally think are like the top, I'm not going to say 10 things, but the few things that really stand out that weren't in the old book or that have changed from the old book. So yeah, we'll get right into that obviously straight away. The first point that I want to make is obviously there's been a few quality of life points changes overall, as well as changes to support systems. So firstly, a lot of the things in the army stayed relatively similar, but important things like the Riptides have actually gone down in points. So the standard loadout that I used for the Riptide, for example, with the Ion Accelerator, twin smart missile systems, with early warning override, velocity tracker, and multi-tracker, used to run you about like 315 points, I think it was, in the old book. It's down to 255 points now. That is a massive points decrease, right? And the reason for this is, like I said, they streamlined a lot of the support systems. So for the most part, things like the early warning override, things like the multi-tracker, the velocity tracker are now free upgrades that you give models. So you basically just say this model's got whatever support systems that you've given it. So I think it's a really, really good little change. Like I said, it's a quality of life change. Because obviously, these are things that you are going to be putting on your models anyways. The things that essentially define the Tau army. So not making you pay points for that now means that you can run more of them in your army. And it just fits with the theme of the Tau, I think, a lot better. There are some still which do cost you points. So for example, there is an upgrade for the Ghost Keel, which is the flare launcher. So that still has a points cost. Things like the shield generators that you can put onto the Crisis battle suits are still points increases, so they're still 5 points each. But instead of being a support system as per se, they are now listed as a piece of war gear that you can give them. So that was just a quick little thing that I wanted to mention with regards to the quality of life points changes that they've made for the Tau army. And you do notice it on a grand scale, because as you start to tally up those points, you notice that you're saving yourself, like 25 points in each of these. That's 50 points. On your broadside, you're also saving yourself a few points with those things, like the ATS and stuff like that. So it really does add up really quickly. But I wanted to jump in, obviously, straight away into the contents of the book. The first thing that we're going to be talking about are the septs. So the septs, I feel, they've done a really good job in giving each of them their own identity. So, for example, the Tau sept is obviously still a good sept. It's not what it was before, which was overwatching on 5s and all that stuff. But that's because they've actually removed the for the greater good as a rule in the book. So the Tau sept now, basically, the bonuses that they give you are essentially you can reroll one hit or wound roll whenever you are fighting or shooting. You have 3 inches extra on all of your auras to a maximum of 12, which is really good. And basically, whenever you're doing any invocations, which are your ethereals, you also get a 3-inch to those as well. So it's pretty good. Like I said, I'm not going to be going into all the different things, but I'm basically just going to be talking about the Tau sept overall is a very, very solid sept. The other ones that you're going to see that are really solid as well are Sasea, which basically is more to do with giving you defensive buffs for your vehicles, for your battle suits, and for your infantry as well. So that's going to be another one that I think is going to be very prevalent. But the one that I think that we're going to see the most is Borkhan. Borkhan overall gives you a very good balance of all of these things. So obviously, one of the first parts of the sept tenets are that you get 4 inches to all the ranged weapons in your army, essentially, right? Which on its own is huge, because that means that now you're basically shooting at half range at 11 inches with fusion blasters, which means that things like Omni Scramblers are a bit less effective because you can obviously position yourself better against them. So things that stop you from deep striking or from moving closer to units aren't as effective. But where you really notice it, funnily enough, are on Fire Warriors. Fire Warriors having a 36-inch range is huge. Bumping that up to a 40-inch range, so they're rapid firing at 20 inches is amazing, right? So that's one of the sep tenets that they get. The other one is when you're getting shot at with a weapon that is, or the ranged weapon that is strength 7 or below, you -1 from the strength characteristic of that, right? And this is only against vehicles and battlesuits, so it benefits obviously your important stuff. But this is good because Volkites, which are prevalent in the meta, even with the points hikes that we've seen in chapter approved, to strength 6, so they're wounding your battlesuits, they're wounding your broadsides on 3s normally. Now they're down to strength 5, which means that now they're wounding you on 4s. And although that one little pip doesn't seem like it's a lot, it's still technically, right, statistically, a 16% chance of survival that you didn't have before. So I think that's a really, really important part of the core of the army. So obviously you'll probably be building a lot of battlesuits, you'll be having obviously your infantry to benefit from the +4 range, but the battlesuits I think are going to play a really, really pivotal role in things like this. And finally, one thing that I do want to mention with Borkhan, because I think it's the clear favorite, is the thing that everyone's probably already seen, which are the experimental weaponry stratagem, which basically is 2 CP, you choose a weapon that a model has, and when you fire, you can't take invulns against that weapon, right? So for example, you have the loadout for the Riptide, you choose the Ion Accelerator, all the shots from there can't have invulns taken against them. It's fantastic. For 2 CP, it's definitely worth it, I'd say. They had done something really interesting with custom septs. Essentially, you can build your own sept, like you can build your own chapter for Space Marines. And the way that they've done it is they've essentially gridded out a map with 5 different sectors, and each of these sectors have specific correlating sept tenets that you can choose. However, with the grid itself, you can only mix and match certain sectors that are essentially adjacent to each other. So Sector A, which is the biggest one, can branch out into all of them, but for example, Sector C, which is at the top of the map, can't be with D or E. So there's a bit of like, you can choose a lot of options, and there's a lot of good options in here, I think. But realistically, you'd normally be wanting to go for Sector A in order to branch out into the other sectors a lot more. A good example of this, for example, is Play Their Part, which is from Sector A. And what this one does is that your battle suits that have 3 or more wounds, I believe it is, count as, battle suit models with 9 or less wounds count as 3 when it comes to controlling an objective marker. So unit of 3 counts as 9, and your big stuff counts as 5. This is really, really good, especially when you partner it with turbojets, which is from Sector E, which basically gives you 2 inches to the move characteristics of units with fly. So, you know, obviously things like your Ghost Keel, things like your Riptides, even your Cold Star Commander, and the battlesuits are all getting this benefit. And it's essentially one of the incentives that Games Workshop have basically put into this book in order to make Tau a mobile army, right? Because they don't want Tau to be a stationary army, which is one of the biggest concerns from the old book. So this is one of the ways that they've seen that they've fixed this. Going into next, we're going to talk about the stratagems. Now, I think the stratagems are the selling point of this book. We've already touched upon the Borkhan one, but overall, I think the book has around 20 stratagems. I could count about 20 stratagems that will see play, that are worth using, and that are just overall great. So one of the things we will mention as well in this is that the savior protocols from drones are now a stratagem. So it's not before where you'd have your drones scattered around the battlefield. Now there's a specific 1 CP stratagem where if you have a drone nearby 3 inches near a battlesuit, or 6 if the unit has a drone controller, you can essentially make the drone intercept the incoming attack. So they've done this because obviously before drone spam was a thing. Nobody wants to see drone spam anymore. So this is a way basically again to streamline the rules a little bit more and make the game faster. It's essentially just that. It's the game now doesn't feel like it takes as long because you don't have the For the Greater Good, you don't have all these drone shenanigans. So it's very, very straight and to the point. A second one that they've brought in now as well is Strike and Fade, which I think is the embodiment of what Tau does. So essentially, it's a jump, shoot, jump stratagem. So you can move your jetpack units. So in other words, your Ghost Keels, your Commanders, your Battlesuit, your Riptides, anything with the jetpack keyword, you can move them in your movement phase, and then you can spend a CP or 2 if the unit is above a certain model count. I believe if it's above 5 models. And then you can immediately, at the start of the shooting phase, shoot with that unit and then move them up to 6 inches. It's a fantastic stratagem. It lets you move a unit forward, shoot something, then fall back behind a ruin so you can't get targeted next turn. There's so many interesting uses for this. And I think it's one of the ones we're going to see played a lot because with some of the shenanigans you can do with cold star battle suits now, for example, I think it's going to be a really looked out for stratagem. It's got a ton of applications. So yeah, and obviously I'm just highlighting these two stratagems mainly because one of them is a change to old rules, and this one is a new mechanic which I feel like embodies what the Tau actually represents really, really well. So coming up next, we're actually going to be talking about the prototype systems. So I'll catch you back in just one moment for that. Okay guys, so basically the next thing that we're going to be talking about are prototype systems. Now, the book has basically delineated prototype systems to relics now. Before, you had your prototype systems, and that was basically your version of relics, and there were some really good ones, but I think this book does a very good job once again of giving you very clear things that are prototype systems and then giving you your relics on the side. So a lot of these prototype systems have once per battle uses, and that's there basically just to represent that they're still essentially testing them out, so they can't use them all the time. It's a really it's thematic and it's really fluffy, and a lot of these have very interesting uses as well. So for example, there is one of them, for example, where you give it to a cold star commander, and once per battle you can essentially do mortal wounds to units nearby, and it's basically because the jet exhausts, the ignitions from them are basically turbocharging, and it just does mortal wounds to everything around. It's really, really cool. There are some standouts in this as well. So the first one is one that was previewed by Games Workshop already, which is the alternating fusion blaster. So this is a fusion blaster that just draws straight lines through stuff, and it basically, every unit that it hits through there that gets drawn this line through takes a wound, right? And obviously this is a fusion, so it's -4, it's d6 plus 2 standard, so don't forget that, guys. It's always d6 plus 2. It does have the downside of being 12-inch range as opposed to 18, but considering you're always counting as half range, it's not really a detriment to you. Now, the interesting little interaction I found with this is that if you have that prototype system on, and you spend 2 CP for the experimental ammunitions stratagem from Borkan that ignores invulns, technically, if you choose that weapon as the weapon to benefit from the stratagem, every unit that you hit will not be able to take their invulnerable save, because you are still only allocating it to that one weapon, despite that weapon targeting or hitting multiple things. So that's a really cool little interaction that I found, and I think it's going to be something that you will see pretty often, not all the time, but I think it will be something you'll see from time to time, because it means that you can just draw lines, go through units of Blade Guard, go through Eradicators, and you can kill multiple models off from each unit. And, you know, like we've seen many times, like just killing 1 or 2 Blade Guard, killing 1 Eradicator from a unit can sometimes hinder the enemy's list enough. And I know I'm using Marines as an example. I'm a Marine player at the end of the day, so I just use them as a point of reference always, because for me they are the benchmark that we see. The second one that I think has a lot of potential to play with is the wide spectrum scanners. Now, this one here essentially is you give it to a model, and when your enemy finishes their movement phase, if they finish within 12 inches of said model with the upgrade, you can shoot at them as if it were your shooting phase, provided they are an eligible target. So if they're obscured, you can't shoot at them, right? But what this means is that it's a further way to punish your opponent's movement phase. So we already know that the movement phase is essentially the most important phase, I'd say, in the game, if not one of. Games are literally won and lost in the movement phase. So this basically gives your opponent extra things to think about. It means that, well, do they want to go this way? Do they want to try and keep something obscured behind a building, even if that means having longer charges? So there's just always those little things that you can play around with, and you can really, really like think these things through, because you can just move a unit forward and say, okay, so this is my 12-inch bubble of places that you can essentially move towards, and you can put yourself into situations where the enemy doesn't have a lot of terrain to hide behind, doesn't have ideal placement. So there are little things that you can do with stuff like that, and obviously these things will take a bit of getting used to as well. I do want to feature it at some point in a battle report, so you guys can see it, because I think it's got a lot of potential. Following through this, we're going to quickly touch upon, for me, one of the biggest glow-ups with regards to Warlord traits, if not the biggest one, right? So Precision of the Hunter in the old book was you give it to, let's say, your Cold Star Commander, and that unit could reroll 1s to wound against vehicles and monsters, which was still good. It had its applications. However, now Precision of the Hunter lets you reroll all hits and wounds with that model, all of them, right? So in combat, you can reroll them. In shooting, you can reroll them. And let me tell you, when you've got 4 fusion blasters on a model and you really need them to go through, this is like your best bet for it. I found that in the one game that I've played with it so far, it was essentially like pivotal, because even when you stick your battle suit into combat, it can still shoot at a -1. So getting those rerolls to hit are really, really important when you are tied up in combat, or when you're just trying to get rid of something like a Contemptor Dreadnought, like in my game against Pardo. I just wanted to really quickly touch upon that because, like I said, we're not doing a full in-depth review either. We are just touching base with the things that I personally think have been really, really good in this book. So, following through, we're going into the relic slots. So again, these are the actual relics, the ones that you can get one for free, and you can pay CPs to get extra ones. There are a lot of relics here, some specific to, for example, Kroot Shapers, some specific to Ethereals, but for the most part, a lot of them are general or have their own limitations in certain senses. So for example, the one that I think has almost infinite value, I'd say, is O2's Lantern. Basically, you give this to a model with a Marker Light, and when you fire your Marker Light, you actually fire 5 additional Marker Lights. So, in the battle report against Pardo, I took this on a Fireblade, and the Cadre Fireblade, and he was shooting 6 Marker Lights by himself. And now we will touch base upon the Marker Light action in a bit, but you will see why that is so invaluable in an army that is still Ballistic Skill 4 at the end of the day. So, I think O2's Lantern is almost an auto-include in most lists, because, like I said, like just firing 6 Marker Lights from one model is phenomenal. The other one that I think is close to being one of the better relics in here, only because of the tricks that you can perform with it, is the Multisensory Discouragement Array. So, if you remember this from the old book, it was basically enemy units within 6 got a -1 to their leadership, which, let's be real, you'd never take that, right? In the new book, you choose an enemy unit within 12, you roll 3d6, and if you surpass their leadership, right? Yeah, if you surpass their leadership, you can choose one of the 3 things to occur until the end of your next movement phase. And the other important thing is that this happens at the end of your movement phase, which means that if you put it on a Cold Star Commander, you can launch it forward, you can use this thing at the end of the movement phase, and it lasts until your next movement phase. So it's got that extra little niche usage because it does happen at the end of your movement phase. So the 3 things you can choose are, the enemy unit that you choose loses OBSEC, which is very good if you are running a custom set and you've got to play their part, because they lose OBSEC, you now throw your Crisis suits on there and you outnumber them, and now you've got the point. The other one that is really interesting is you half the move and charges that enemy unit makes, right? So you target the unit, if they move 6, now they move 3, and when they charge, they roll 2d6 and they divide that by 2. Obviously, you round that up, so if they get a 7, it's 3.5, it's actually 4, but it's still removing a lot of movement from the unit. And finally, the gimmicky one, the one that I think has, again, some niche play, is that every time a model in that unit attacks, it can only attack the closest eligible unit. So what you do is you throw the commander forward, you throw your Crisis Bodyguards forward, and you do this on something really important like Eradicators or on like Contemptor Dread, and you basically make it so that the only thing they can target is the Cold Star Commander, and then you keep your Crisis Bodyguards nearby, behind a wall or something, basically just abusing the bodyguard rule as most Marine players already do, but then basically means that you shut off 1 unit from the opponent's army to fire, which is why it's better, in my opinion, than the standard bodyguard shenanigans that people are performing, because with normal bodyguard, you can get around it by saying, well, I just won't target the character, I'll target something else. With this, you're basically shutting off a Contemptor, an Eradicator. I mean, anything that you just don't want to be shot at basically for that turn. So it's a really, really, I think, niche and specific relic and use of it, but something that you will see people do from time to time because it's super powerful against certain armies. Finally, we're gonna, well, not finally, but close to finally, we're gonna go on to the secondaries. So, the secondaries for me, and I don't mean this, you know, in a negative way, because I think the book overall has a lot of really good stuff in it. The secondaries feel like they missed the mark slightly. So, I'm just going to get them really quickly. Here we are. So, the 3 secondaries play off of again, thematic stuff that the Tau like to do. But I feel like the execution was just missed out on slightly, right? So I'll give you an example, which we will be touching upon the philosophies of war right at the very end. But there is a secondary in the battlefield supremacy role, decisive action, where you can only score points per battle round depending on the philosophy of war that you've chosen. So if you've chosen Montcalm as your tactical philosophy, you can score 4 points at the end of battle rounds 1, 2, and 3 if you're holding half or more of the objectives, right? So essentially, maxing this one is really difficult, and taking it when there's something like Stranglehold in the same category is going to be really difficult to justify, I'd say personally, right? And obviously, the Kayun side of it is the same. So instead of being on turns 1, 2, and 3, it'll be on turns 3, 4, and 5, but you can only score 4 victory points for each. So you're maxing at 12, and if you miss out on one of them, you're scoring 8. And that there is I think personally, it's a really big letdown. I think it still has some applications, especially in the Montcalm portion of the philosophy of war, because I feel like that one is the better of the two, but we will touch upon them shortly. But I feel, for example, like the secondaries in general, just they miss out on all this stuff. But I understand why they've done it. They've done it because they wanted it to be thematic and to follow through with the whole idea of they essentially have a doctrine that they're following, which is either the Kayun or the Montcalm, and this is basically mirrored with the secondary choices that you can get. The third one is a shadow operations one. Essentially, it's similar to deploy, retrieve Nachman data now, except instead of doing them in table quarters, you put objective markers or blips halfway up each board edge, and then you perform an action on each of them or nearby each of them to score you 2, 6, 9, or 15, depending on how many you've done. I don't think it's going to see a lot of use. I think for that, you may as well just run retrieve Nachman data, because it's one that finishes instantly. Fine, you have to roll for it, but this one is one that completes at the end of your next command phase. And I don't know, there's just something about that which makes me feel like you don't want to be doing it. And also, when you're looking at the fire marker lights action, which is something that you normally want to do with units like Pathfinders, which are the ones that you'll delegate to be doing actions with, it just feels like a very tough choice for me, especially when you have something similar or easier to do like retrieve Nachman's data available to you. So, with all that being said, we will now go into the bit that I think is confusing for some players with the wording, but is the bit that I feel like gives the most personality to the Tau Codex, which are their philosophies of war. So to begin with, Montcalm, if you choose that one, and the good thing about this is that you choose this when you know which player has the first turn. So if you get first turn and you want to be aggressive with your army, you can choose Montcalm. If you know that you're going second and your army needs to play a bit more reserved, you can choose Kayun if you want to instead. So it's got that bit of flexibility to it as well. So if you choose Montcalm, it is active during battle rounds 1, 2, and 3. And essentially, anytime a unit in your army that has this philosophy of war makes a move, a normal move, or an advance, they count as remaining stationary. That is huge. That is essentially army-wide advance and shoot normally, which for me is just phenomenal. Considering Tau have always been criticized for not being mobile, not having any incentives to move up the board, this is, for me, feels like a no-brainer straight away. The second part, which is the part that I will say this, I forgot it for the majority of the battle report that I played with Pardo, is that whenever you're making a range attack towards the closest eligible enemy unit, if they are within one of the ranges shown in the table that there is below here, you improve the armor pen by 1, and you can reroll wounds of 1. So on turn 1, that range is 18 inches, on turn 2, that range is 12 inches, and on turn 3, that range is 9 inches. So essentially, if you're on turn 3 and you're targeting the closest enemy unit to you within 9, you get +1 to your AP, or an extra -1 to your AP, better said, and you get to reroll wounds of 1. And like I said, this goes 18, 12, 9, depending on the battle round that you're on. Kayun, which is active on battle rounds 3, 4, and 5, basically allows you to fall back and shoot at a -1. So essentially, you become Ultramarines, which is good for an army that needs to shoot. It's good if your Fire Warriors get stuck in a combat that they don't want to be in. You need to open yourself up so other units can shoot at that thing. It gives you that option of falling back, shooting at a -1, and then just being able to shoot other things into it. So it's got a little bit of play, but again, it's only active on battle rounds 3, 4, and 5. And the second part is obviously the same thing. You choose an enemy unit within 12 inches, and if that is the closest eligible unit to you, on battle round 3, unmodified hit rolls of 6s give you additional hits. On 4, it's 5 pluses, and on battle round 5, it's 4 pluses. Now, the reason why I think this one is worse than Montcar overall is because you have to think about what's going to be left on the battlefield by turn 4 or 5, right? There's not going to be a lot benefiting from this, so that's why you get this. Essentially, you get a very good benefit, but the amount of models that you'll have using it or getting the actual benefits from it are going to be substantially lower than what you get with Montcar, which is why I personally think that Montcar wins out over this. Quick mention before obviously we end the video is the changes to the Markerlight action. So Markerlights now are an action that you perform at the start of your movement phase, and they complete at the start of your shooting phase. So this means basically, let's say that you are a unit of Pathfinders. They essentially will start the action, and by the time that they get to the start of the shooting phase, the action is completed. So let's say you are a unit of 10 Pathfinders. The 10 Pathfinders perform this action successfully. You then roll 10d6 at units of your choosing, and for every 3 up that you get, you essentially put a Markerlight token on that unit. Now, Markerlights, again, super streamlined. You don't need to worry about a table. You don't need to memorize anything. Every time a unit fires at a unit with Markerlights, you consume a Markerlight and you add 1 to the hit rolls. So this is what I was saying. The core issue with the army is that the Ballistic Skill 4 for the most part, right? Having that extra 1 to them and having them all at Ballistic Skill 3 makes the world of a difference. And this is why I really like this change to the structure of the book in general, as well as the way the Markerlights work. The Markerlights, again, feel like a core component of the army, and you don't need to be memorizing tables or anything like that. So, yeah, that's basically my take on this, what I consider to be a fantastically written book overall. There are some really strong stuff in it. There's some stuff which feels alright, but I feel like this codex has a very, very good amount of internal balance overall. Comparing it to things like what we see with Drukhari, what we saw with the Admech release, even to some extent things like Grey Knights will have a fantastic secondary that you're always going to take. Those armies just feel super strong off the bat, and like, you know, there's more than just one build and one way to take them that is very powerful. With this army, with the Tau, I think that there's going to be a lot of different builds. We're going to see a few variations of things, but for the most part, the book feels very well structured. So I'm personally really excited to get some more test games in with them. You know, I want to start using them at like local events and RTTs. I want to use them as much as I can. I'm also really tempted to just get myself a Tower army so we can have the studio one and my own personal Tower army as well, because this book is, for me personally, is fantastic. Like I like this book as much as I like the Sisters of Battle book, and although I'm still painting up my Sisters of Battle army really slowly, it is an army I want to field one day, and this for me feels on par with that sort of power level. Strong, consistent, but not over the top. So yeah, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Thank you very much for watching through to the end. If you've liked the content, please drop a like down at the bottom, and feel free to subscribe as well. Also, if you happen to want to support the SN Battle Reports in any way, shape or form, we have snbattlereports.com, which is our website where we put exclusive content down, and there should also be a little join button down here if it's available for your country. But yeah, guys, it's been a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed this like I've already said, and I will catch you in the next one.